No issue can be understood fully through a single lens. We need to be able to adopt different perspectives to understand fully what is involved in a particular issue.
These various sciences really have some kind of common core, and why not teach the common core?
If we're going to be in a position of trying to reach a decision, reach an agreement with others around the table, the more we can understand their perspective, the more likely it is that we'll be able to play an effective role in guiding the group towards a decision.
I think a lot of good thinking comes about in the social sciences when things become interdisciplinary, when people start using certain economic techniques in order to do international relations or whatever. At the LSE, we always believed that philosophy and the sciences should be continuous.
I think it's an absolutely fascinating course, and I think it's the right way to start your life in the social sciences and your life at the LSE.
The first question I want to ask is the whole question whether or not there could be a single truth about key events.
The obvious answer is that no, and one of the things that always strikes me when talking to my fellow historians is how we can go to the same archive, we can read the same material, and yet we can each come up with a different explanation. Having said that, I do actually think that an expert's considered view of why a particular set of events took place is worth reading, worth engaging with, worth disagreeing with, even if it's just that one expert's take.
If you look at courses as we find them in most universities, you dive straight into your subject. But your particular specialism, as you will develop it, sits amongst other ways of looking at things. In LSE100, we try to help you grapple in an analytical way with the big problems of our times, and to do it in a way that introduces the concepts that you'll need to take on these problems.
One of the aims of LSE100 is to give students a broader set of skills, both analytical skills in terms of being able to think about issues not only from their own disciplinary perspective as, say, an economist, but also to learn something about what it's like to think like a lawyer, to think like an anthropologist, to think like a political scientist, to bring to bear different perspectives in understanding any problem or issue that they might face.
We do one degree, so it's very easy to adopt one view on things and one approach to the world and high specialisation. And from LSE100 we gained different approaches, and we were able to understand underlying themes running through all the topics that we covered, and that definitely came from the breadth of subjects that we did.
When you really read methodology texts of these various disciplines, they may have different emphases and they may have different terminology, but I think there's a lot of that in there that's really in common.
It's very much about giving students both an intellectual toolkit and a communications, teamwork, information skills toolkit.
It's a little bit like, you teach them algebra and calculus in order to go and build bridges, right? So in the same way you could say, look, you teach them the core of scientific thinking in order for them then to take that core and to apply it to the particular questions that arise in their own areas.
One of the things we're helping students to do is to develop their information skills about how they find the information that they need, how they evaluate whether that's valid information, whether it's useful information, and then how they manage it in terms of the uses they need to put that information to.
Is therefore the purpose of LSE100 to make everybody sceptical?
To a certain extent, yes. No, I think that's not a bad starting place. Skepticism, yes. I don't think it need necessarily lead to cynicism. So nothing matters, it's all the same, we can't know anyway, what's the point?
I think the issue about scepticism is an important one. It's not the same thing as cynicism, obviously not. And scepticism is about making us all think about the uses of evidence and not thinking there's a single truth out there.
Trying to be really sceptical and saying, okay, how did they get to that explanation? How did they get to that case? Then you really need to unpick it all, and you need, the best way of doing that is to look at the footnotes, the endnotes, whatever they may be.
We're also very concerned about students' communication skills, about their being able to write effectively, present arguments effectively, to lay out their argument and the justification for that position and the evidence that supports that.
A critical skill that I really developed was my essay writing. What the course really usefully did was enable me to stand back and look at how I was writing, which I found incredibly useful going forward.
When you look at specific sciences, they're often very, very heavy on jargon that's specific to those sciences. But if you really take it apart, it's a very straightforward thing what is being said, right? And I think that's also part of the message that I want to convey. I think it's good when you do philosophy of science to sort of come down from your ivory tower and to do something, where you get your hands dirty, in the real world, all right? It's important for the students to get this core thinking, and then when they get that core thinking, then they can take that and take their own classes, and that will enrich their experience of those classes.
Well, the challenge in designing LSE100 has been to put together a set of topics that introduce students to a wide variety of different ways of thinking like a social scientist. In the first module, we look at climate change.
The greenhouse gases which are causing the atmosphere of the world to warm up will stay in the atmosphere, so far as we know, for 1,000 years or more.
There's huge issues around climate change, international relations, psychology, government, the legal structure of who's responsible for what part.
What are the costs likely to be? What are the trade-offs between early action and later action?
It's also a story of deep political change, of understanding ways in which societies get together and organize themselves differently.
Think about it as a political scientist, maybe even as a philosopher who's concerned about the ethics of climate change.
You can see the way in which all the disciplines at the LSE will have to be brought to bear to understand this new energy industrial revolution.
We go from climate change into does culture matter? We then go on to think about why it is we have so much trouble predicting great events. Then the financial crisis, population growth, and then we finish with a module aimed at understanding who owns ideas, and we need to think about whether the current copyright law is well suited to this new environment with file sharing, with social networking.
It equips you to analyze the problems that society faces.
For me, it's just fascinating to get that kind of challenge on my plate.
It taught me that there were a variety of right answers. It taught me the need for interdisciplinary cooperation. And in that sense, it was not only extremely intellectually enriching, it was also very humbling.
The students benefit by learning something in general about scientific reasoning before starting to think about scientific reasoning in my special field.
So it enriches you analytically in the areas that really count, but it does it in a way that brings together different disciplines and makes you a much better team player and collaborator, as well as a leader.
Once they leave the school and they're confronted with real-world problems, they'll have a set of tools that are really very useful for addressing those more effectively.
Already I've had a really positive experience when engaging with potential employers going forward. An interviewer turned to me and said, you guys at the LSE100 answering all these big questions on the financial crisis, on property rights, on also a range of ideas. Don't you think you're going to find commercial law a bit boring? It was probably the hardest question I had to answer at interview, and I think the fact it was is a real credit to the course.
The way that course is taught, that really eases you into classes. So people who initially might be hesitant might find that with time they'll be falling in love with this course.